Ian here, and very quickly before we begin today's show, a huge thank you goes out to all of the Commercial Drones FM podcast supporters on Patreon for their incredibly generous monthly donations that help keep this show running. And if you, yes, that's you who is listening to this right now, also want to help, you can do so for just $1 small per month. That measly dollar not only goes to support the creation and maintenance of this podcast, but also grants you access to the private Commercial Drones FM supporters-only Facebook community, which is growing every day. Additionally, I've spent some time personally designing some great new Commercial Drones FM swag. T-shirts, hoodies, and yes, even coffee mugs are now available from the Commercial Drones FM website at www.commercialdrones.fm. So whether you want to get private Facebook group access or even find your next favorite t-shirt, just go check out www.commercialdrones.fm, and on the top menu bar, you'll see links for both support and swag on the website. So thank you for your patronage. Back to the show. Welcome to CommercialDrones.fm, the podcast that explores the commercial drone industry, the people who power it, and the concepts that drive it. I'm your host, Ian Smith. Hey everyone, Ian Smith here, and welcome to Commercial Drones FM. We are here today in San Francisco with Dan McKinnon, who is VP of Product at 3D Robotics. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks so much for being here. So, first of all, Dan, where are you from and how did you get into drones?
So I'm from Boulder, Colorado, and I have a pretty interesting story for my journey to drones. I was doing my PhD in polymer physics at the University of Colorado, and I had this little discovery where I learned to make a new chemical reagent. And this chemical reagent was fairly useful. And so I developed this licensing agreement with a company called Jenna Bioscience and started selling this reagent. And here I was, like, very academic minded, interested in an academic position post-grad school. And I said, hey, this is kind of fun. And we didn't really make any money. I think we made a couple $1,000s on selling this reagent. It wasn't a particularly successful business, but it kind of tickled my itch for entrepreneurship. And then after that, kind of lo and behold, as my dad was retiring from an academic position, he started a small engineering firm called InventWorks. And actually, on a podcast like this one, he was talking with the director of R&D at the Denver Zoo, Rich Reading. And Rich has a project in Mongolia at a preserve called Icknart. And he had this huge problem with Cinereous vultures. This is the second largest bird on Earth, and they're very, very skittish. They used to migrate from Portugal to South Korea. Massive migration pattern, very majestic animal. And the Spaniards and Portuguese started feeding the birds dead carcasses, so they didn't want to leave their little happy land there. And the North Koreans are hunting them, and the South Koreans are creating like zoos for these things. So this majestic animal really had its migration fragmented. So it's just some in the Iberian Peninsula and then some in the Korean Peninsula. And the zoo really wanted to understand how this human activity was affecting their migration patterns around this park in Mongolia. How you do this is you put a little radio backpack on a bird. So it's a pretty lightweight thing. These are massive birds, so you're not loading them down too much, and you're able to track their pattern. And then they shoot a message up to a satellite every so often, and you're able to track their migration. The biggest problem is, how do you put the backpack on the birds? These birds live on these rock spires in the middle of the Gobi Desert. And, Rich had just, this was 5 years ago, maybe. This was before you could buy a DJI Phantom from Best Buy. This was very, very early days in drones. And Rich had just kind of heard about this electric helicopter thing that some people were doing, was on my dad's radio show. They kind of got to talking. Dad had this engineering firm and said, let's try to build you a drone that will carry a net, that you can drop the net on top of these vultures, and then you'll be able to run up the rock spire while the vulture's in the net, and then grab them with the backpack and track their migration. So, this sounds like something out of Looney Tunes, but here I am. My dad gets this project. He needs somebody to go to Mongolia for 3 weeks to help him deploy the drone. We build this thing together using a 3DR Pixhawk and all these hobby parts, build all the servos and actuators to drop the net.
What year was this?
This was, I gotta be 2012 then. And so we build this huge contraption, go as far as, doing demo net drops in the soccer field next to his office. We go to the Denver Zoo and fly over a Cinereous Vulture that's actually in captivity to see if it bothers the bird. Doesn't bother bird. And then we go ahead and we deploy to Mongolia. Drones were hard back then. This thing did not fly very well in the 30, 40 mile an hour winds in the Gobi Desert, many, many issues in the field. It turns out we were spectacularly unsuccessful at netting Cinereous Vultures, but did learn a lot about drones and had 3 weeks in a yurt in Mongolia to talk about what they'd be good for. Had some friends and family in agriculture, being from Colorado, had read the AUVSI report that's, kind of infamous right now about agriculture, and decided that, as I was finishing up grad school, we would start this surveying business together, this agricultural surveying business, and put together the business plan, took it through the CU business competition, won the clean tech track, and launched this, and this became Agribotix, which is a great business right now, selling analytics platforms to farmers all across the Midwest. So it was a really cool success story for how I got into drones. And then after I finished up my PhD, I decided that working with my dad and staying in my hometown for my entire life was not what I wanted to do. So I packed up my bags and moved across the country.
Really cool story kind of getting into this industry. And so can you tell us a little bit more about Agribotix? Because that's another company that, as you mentioned, is still around. So you're currently with 3D Robotics. You're not with Agribotix. Did you sell your part of the company, or how does that work out?
I still serve as an informal advisor. I mean, I have my part of the company. I hop on the phone with my dad and the CEO, Lou Faust, every now and then. Obviously in a very similar space, and I like to work with them still.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. All right, still involved in Agribotix. Nice. Okay, moving on to 3D Robotics then. So 3DR, so how long have you been with 3D Robotics currently? I mean, I guess you've had different roles, I think. I was looking at your LinkedIn.
Yeah, so I joined 3D Robotics a little over 2 years ago as a product manager, and it was super interesting. 3DR was in the midst of a big transition. After pretty much dominating the DIY hobby space, which at that point, now it's obvious that Pixhawk and PX4 is the default DIY hobby research stack. But at that point, it really wasn't true. There was Microcopter, and I think that Airware may have released a consumer autopilot. There was 3DR. There was a number of different competing projects. So 3DR really won that. Grew to a mid-sized business. I think $5 or $10 million a year. A really, really nice research business. Pretty much every academic lab was developing drones on Pixhawk, and then the next step was clearly consumer. And there was this massive golden egg of consumer that, and again, it's easy to look back and right now say, DJI's own this. This is obviously a multi-billion-dollar business. But at that point, it really wasn't clear. Phantom 2 Vision Plus was, pretty weak platform. Phantom 2 with the GoPro is kind of the de facto thing. No one had really owned this consumer space at that point. And so 3DR wanted it. Everyone said it was going to be everyone said it was going to be $1 billion business in 2015. That's a lot bigger than the total addressable market of the hobby business, which is probably pretty close to max that out. So the actually former DJI North America team joined with 3DR, and everyone was full steam ahead on developing Solo, which was going to be the ultimate consumer product, the ultimate consumer drone. So that's where 3DR was at when I joined. And I joined as product manager for enterprise. And this was something that everyone from Chris on down knew 3DR had to do.
That was going to be Chris Anderson.
Chris Anderson, the CEO, my boss. And he's presented this graph for probably the last 5 years. Yeah, you've seen it. Everyone in the drone industry has seen it. It's got the adoption curve of hobby versus consumer versus enterprise. And of course, it takes longer to adopt an enterprise product, but that's really where the value is in drones. And when I joined 3DR a little over 2 years ago, it wasn't clear what sector would be the big winner for enterprise drones. There was the AUVSI report. There was something that I think Piper Jaffray sent out shortly after that. Colin Snow, our drone analyst, who I'm sure you have on the show or are having him on the show, had his own thoughts, and it really wasn't clear. So Chris said, hey, I don't know what we're going to do, whether it's going to be a pro level autopilot, a mil spec Pixhawk that's going to be piloting Reapers, whether it's going to be a software package that does some kind of analytics, whether it's going to be a plane or a quadcopter. Just go out into the world and figure out how we're going to make money in the commercial space with drones.
And that was like your mission when you started.
That was my mission when I started. And so I did. So, for 3 to 6 months was like mega customer development. I had a great mentor and boss, Jeevan Kalanithi, who's doing his own startup right now. And he said, hey, look, let's just build a new business right here. So went and visited quarries, inspected roofs, went to farms, obviously.
You were doing
construction sites,
the inspections and everything yourselves.
Yeah, no, I did all of these jobs for a day or two at a time, and came back and synthesized my notes and, dug deeper and said, let's do it again and let's learn more. And slowly that funnel started to narrow. There was a set of criteria. It was, is this market ready for drones? There's great markets like residential roof inspections are an awesome example of huge, high volume. There's tens of thousands of roof inspections every year. Expensive. Companies spend a ton of money on this. Dangerous. The inspectors will fall off roofs quite frequently, and it costs the companies a lot in terms of workers' comp insurance to keep them up there. And super obvious that you could do these with a drone. But the industry wasn't quite ready. Insurance industry is like super, super conservative. And the day of every State Farm inspector having a drone on his belt, is a couple years out, probably not on the time scale that we're interested in. So on and so forth, took every industry through that kind of same very rigorous, structured methodology, and then came down this funnel and eventually arrived on engineering and construction. And what's really been cool to see that is how many other players in the space have consolidated on that as well. So, the average construction project is totally starved by information. It's running 80% over budget, 20 months behind schedule. There's not enough data letting superintendents, foremen, owners, architects, designers, engineers on the site know what's going on. And it was pretty clear that a drone solution could help them from a regulatory perspective. It's awesome because they own the site. You don't have any privacy concerns. Even in the 333 days, you could get a 333 and fly over these sites. And they have money to buy equipment. So kind of checked all the boxes, and that's where we went.
I really appreciate your approach with that. It's very pragmatic, which is something that I think a lot of people also appreciate. So now you're VP of product. So you're the first VP of product. I hope I'm not mistaken. I believe you're the first VP of product that's been a guest on the podcast. So what exactly, can you tell us what a VP of product for a enterprise-focused drone company does?
Yeah, absolutely. So I lead product management, design, and product marketing. At 3DR, we're structured like, a very typical tech company. So from the product management side, it's building out the roadmap. What are the types of features that customers want to see that will let us ultimately sell more in the future? So we're going to get a ton of different pipes coming into that product roadmap. It's coming from sales. They might think if we have this widget, we're going to be able to close this deal. It's coming from customers. We have customers that say, oh, I really need this to be able to do this type of project. It's coming from support. Support is saying, oh, we really are finding customers are having problems with this feature. Can we get it tweaked or added? It's coming from engineering. If only we had time to refactor this feature, we'd be able to have it run faster or have less tech debt. And so there's an entire, a number of different pipes coming into the product roadmap, and work with my product manager to prioritize all of those and get them into a format that the engineering team can build off of. Then the next step of that is the design. Is we know that we need to build these features for the product, and each one of those features is now spec'd out, with a high amount of detail. So we know we're building what customers want. We're constantly iterating with all of the stakeholders to make sure that we're building what people actually want. But it needs to go through a design process where the customer is going to be able to use that feature. We see that with a lot of enterprise software. It's becoming much more design focused, whereas it used to be that you could just add a feature and, old enterprise software is like the key for this. Look at an Oracle or an AutoCAD or something like that. It's very, very hard to use. But this consumerization of enterprise means that enterprise software now needs to be easy to use. So designer will take a look at those specs and say, this is what I ultimately want to do, and I'm going to do a bunch of user research and testing and design to make sure that this feature is discoverable, easy to use, and will be delightful for the user. That's like the ultimate tech adjective. And then finally, people have to know about it, and that's where product marketing comes in. And this is actually a fairly new role for me, so I stepped up to lead product marketing in addition to design and product management about 2 months ago. And this is all about customer success and education. I believe that all of the players in the drone industry right now are not competing with each other, but rather competing with customers doing nothing or buying additional survey equipment or total stations, GPSs, things like this. And we need to get together and educate all of our customers the value of these enterprise drones. So showing specific stories of how, we've published a few recently. The Arizona DOT is using drones to plan for a construction of a bridge that's getting replaced. How PCL Construction is QAing their grading with drones. How West Builders is using it to document the location of the PT cables before they pour. How Bogue Engineering is doing it to monitor their change order requests. So there's all these very specific technical things that we can drill down into. And from a product marketing perspective, we need to be able to go all the way down to specifically, you're this type of business, this is the type of benefit you get from drones, all the way up to the question when somebody says, oh, what can enterprise drones do? You can tell them in a single sentence.
So going back to Solo, everybody wants to know, everyone always is curious. It's the talk of the town always, I'm sure you're used to this. So basically what happened with Solo a little bit, like there was a lot of attention put on that drone. Mm-hmm. It was the golden egg of consumer that everybody wants to win. From the beginning, there was all that attention and then lots of ensuing drama. So let's make it a productive question. Like what kind of lessons were learned from the whole experience of Solo?
Yeah, making a drone is really, really hard. It used to be if you had a soldering iron and could write a little bit of code, you could make a production drone. Now, I wouldn't recommend anyone make a drone unless they're also thinking about making a cell phone. So if you are...
Why is that?
The technology is the same. So if you are an Apple or a Samsung, go ahead and think about making a drone. But if you are a hobbyist who's throwing together an autopilot and a number of components, it is a really, really tough game to get into. There was a drone holocaust last year. The Hexopluses and AirDogs and Flydios, and I actually have a Google Doc list of them somewhere, and it was really, really hard. I'm super impressed with the 3DR team for building such a great product, and actually I love flying Solo for fun. I think it's still the easiest to use drone. I, of course, own them all. I have a Mavic and I have a Phantom, and DJI makes incredible products, but I think what Solo did so well is it's just so damn easy to use. The smart shots make it so easy to get compelling aerial footage. So that was one great lesson, is make these things easy to use. Another is just, it's really hard. The drone technology curve sped up, I think, faster than anything else that's ever happened in technology. If you picked up an iPhone 5, which is now... 4 years old, I believe?
Something like that, yeah, because then the 5S, and then you got the... Yeah.
So an iPhone 5 is totally recognizable as a great cell phone. You wouldn't look at that cell phone and think it's lacking any kind of features. It's got the lightning plug. It's got the forward and backward facing cameras. I've got I think iPhone 6S in my pocket, and if you swapped it for an iPhone 5, I really wouldn't even know. It might be a little slower. Now take 4 years back in drone land. You've got a Mavic right now in your pocket. And I say in your pocket because if you had big pockets, it literally could go there. It's got front and downward facing stereo obstacle avoidance. It's got sonar. It's got so much computer vision on there that you can just wave at it and it'll take your picture. It folds up. You can put it in your pocket. You can run any number of apps on there. This is a full-featured piece of technology that combines the best of Tesla, of smartphones, of top cloud computing. I mean, everything is in this little thing. And then go 4 years ago, and what you would have is, to stick with DJI, 4 years ago, they might have had a Phantom 1. It didn't have a camera. Its range was about 100 yards. It sometimes flew away. I mean, the pace of evolution in drone technology, just blew us away.
Wow. Yeah, that's super true. I'm just looking back to my first drone it cost me about $5,000. It was like 2013, had the DJI NASA MV2. I didn't use the Pixhawk for some reason. I don't remember why.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah, I know. I should have used the Pixhawk, but and it had like a FPV camera. I had to source the video transmitter and the receiver and then the FPV goggles, and there was soldering, and there was just everything going on, and it was so expensive and very time consuming, and it doesn't even begin to hold a camera, a candle to what is now. I mean, even the Phantom 3 was a great platform too, and the Solo was way more advanced ever. Like, what year did the Solo come out? Was that 2015?
2015.
So 2 years after my $5,000 excursion, there was just much better drones with integrated hardware and software and all these things. So, okay, so does Solo then exist today? Because sometimes I feel like I see it with a Sony camera targeted towards enterprise, or is it being manufactured still, or is it just like the remaining Solos are being repurposed for specific enterprise work and newer sensors that are kind of mounted on them?
Yeah, so Solo exists in two forms right now. They might be all gone from a consumer perspective, but Best Buy was continuing to sell them until they ran out. I actually just bought myself one because I feel like I really couldn't go on in this world without owning a Solo, because I love it. It's a great drone for videography. And
did you go to a Best Buy or?
Yeah. Nice. I just walked in and picked it up, and it's like it's just something that I feel like I'm going to have the rest of my life.
Yeah. It's
and
like
I also,
the old Apple computers and things. People go crazy over that stuff.
Yeah, and I just love flying that thing too. There's some pleasure around taking video with Solo that I just don't get from DJI products, even though from a tech perspective they've totally surpassed it. So that's one avenue where Solo exists, and it's not going to exist much longer. And then there's the site scan drone. With what we did was we upgraded the GPS and the motor pod, developed a custom gimbal for a Sony camera that Sony made custom for us. It's really the best camera in the sky. It's a 20 megapixel APS-C sensor, holds really high quality glass, and that's the drone that SiteScan is currently compatible with. So it's based on a lot of the Solo internals, but a bunch of pieces have been upgraded, most notably the camera.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. And so the new kind of focus of 3D robotics, construction and enterprise. I guess you kind of already explained why you kind of chose those two, but is there any other? I mean, what are you guys hoping to accomplish in this industry, specifically for construction, with 3D robotics, site scan, and the partnership with Autodesk? What's kind of the main goal here?
Yeah, so I'd step back from that just 1 second and say, for your listeners and for people who aren't super familiar with the industry, construction, as many people see it, is actually this combination of two things. There's design and there's build. So it's called AEC frequently. So you'll see this, in all the companies in the space or the providers in the space. They're going to be architects, they're going to be engineers, they're going to be constructors. And the architects and engineers lump into this designers category. So they're actually designing what goes on. And in a very typical build cycle, the owner contracts a designer to design exactly what they want. The designers go and design it, whether that's how does it look, which is the architects, or will it fall over, which is the structural engineer within the constraints of what the architect has. How is the building going to be heated and cooled and fire? And there's all these other engineers that do various things, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, MEP. And then in a traditional cycle, they would then hand those plans back to the owner, say, I'm done. And then the owner would go and would have a bidding process. So would put those plans out and say, any constructor, any contractor that wants to build this, go ahead and let me know how much it'll cost. So just to be totally clear, we're looking at both the engineers and the constructors for this product. And actually, most of our customers are on the engineering side rather than the constructor side. So I would say we're building drones for engineering and construction, but it's mostly actually on the engineering side.
Good to know. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. And so specifically, what are we trying to do with that? I'd say the number one use case for drones across any industry really is what I would broadly categorize as augmenting survey. So survey is a very, very old school field. It was done, in the 1800s when people were surveying the entire country, and they were doing it with trigonometry and sight glasses. And, then it was done by airplanes through aerial photogrammetry. And there's a lot of different ways to know that this point on the ground is at some XYZ position relative to some other point on the ground, whether it's relative to the center of the earth, the monument out back, some point on your site. But surveying is also, for various reasons, expensive. It's hard to get done on a regular basis, and it's not really common. So to provide an example of like what a surveyor would do would be, say, stake out the property lines of a building. And then a constructor who wanted to put a wall in some area on the property lines would either contract that surveyor to come and do that. That's very expensive. Or more and more constructors and service providers like the engineers would go in and they would operate their own survey equipment. So this is either a GPS device or a total station. And there's an entire mess of regulatory reasons why sometimes constructors can do that. For example, if you don't have a surveying license in the state of New Jersey, you're not allowed to touch a total station, even though it's quite easy to use right now. So there's, I don't want to dig deep into why this is hard, but what a drone lets you do is basically get a pretty darn good survey of millions of points with a single 15-minute flight that might take, for a topographic survey of a big site, it might take 3 days. So it dramatically speeds that process. And then from that base use case, you can do a million different things.
Well, I'm sold. You sold it very well. That's exactly how it should be described. So looking forward then in the future, what does the future have in store for you, Dan, and also for 3D Robotics?
So the future is all about turning this shiny object into a hammer. I want drones on construction sites to be simple tools that people don't even look at anymore. On some sites, we're getting there. One of our customers next to our office, actually, it's great. When they first started flying, everyone on site looked up and it's a bird, it's a plane. And now it's just a thing that's documenting progress. And
they just kind of ignore it. It's like, oh yeah, drone's flying again.
Yeah, just like they would ignore any other fundamental tool for construction. So this needs to become a total station, a laser scanner, a hammer. It's probably never going to become a hammer, but this needs to become a very standard piece of construction technology that's in every constructor's toolbox or every engineer's toolbox.
Do you think there's going to be drones that are just very, very targeted specifically for construction? Like, this is the drone for construction. You need to buy this specific one because it has this sensor and this ruggedness to it. It resists dust and dirt and oil and whatever you would else, impacts and things like that? Or do you think it's still going to be, I guess we're kind of seeing that, like, if you look at DJI, for example, with the M200 platform, that's very, very targeted for like search and rescue and utility inspection and stuff. But what do you think about construction drones? Do you think there will be a very specific kind of hardware developed for specifically construction?
I think that the drone market will segment into consumer and enterprise. So right now, it's this, everyone is using a prosumer drone. Let's call it Phantom 4 Pro. It's not waterproof, it's not ruggedized. The camera isn't particularly designed for anything in particular, whether it's aerial cinematography or photogrammetry or inspection. So I think that's going to end. I think in the next few years, you will not see a standard prosumer consumer drone on the job site. I think you'll see something like the M200, which is waterproof, different payloads. You might have a thermal and a zoom camera and a photogrammetry camera. Maybe they'll do a Hasselblad 50 megapixel medium format or something like that. I think that's really the future, but I don't see a engineer needing a different drone from somebody in agriculture, from somebody in oil and gas. I think that the same basic hardware platform will serve most of those markets, but there's an incredible opportunity to differentiate in software. And a lot of drone software right now is fairly undifferentiated. It's, I can save inspection photos, I can make a map, I can do a 3D model, but those data are actually very, very difficult for people in these industries to use because it's something new. And it's a whole layer that needs to sit on top of that in terms of analyzing that data and presenting it in a way that's familiar with those users. So I think that's where we're going to see a lot of differentiation.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dan. That was great. Thank you. That was Dan McKinnon, who's the VP of Product at 3D Robotics. You can go ahead and you can follow Dan on Twitter at Daniel McKinnon, but replace the O in McKinnon with a 0. And then visit his blog at ddmckinnon.com. That's McKinnon, of course, with 2 N's. And then, check out 3D Robotics on their Twitter, which is at 3D Robotics, and visit their website at 3dr.com. So, Dan, any last thoughts before we go ahead and cut off the mics?
I think we covered it. Thanks for hosting me on Commercial Drones FM, and look forward to hearing the rest of your guests as you continue to move along.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for being here, Dan. You can follow the podcast at Drones Podcast, and then check out the website at commercialdrones.fm. We've got some really cool episodes coming up in store for you, and check out some of the previous episodes as well. Thank you so much for listening, and we're cutting off the mics. Cheers.